Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Creativity Boost podcast. Today I have the pleasure of having Noah join me. Noah is a very great individual that I happen to meet, and he's gonna do justice to the topic we're going to be discussing today. And I don't want to, go ahead and talk about his background or introduce him because I believe he's going to be in the best place to introduce himself. But just as a background, we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence and creativity today. And basically, we're just going to be touching around some of the very important things that you must know as an individual about artificial intelligence and its impact on human creativity. So, I have on the show today, like I said earlier, a very, very qualified personnel, someone that I believe will be able to do justice to this conversation and to this topic. And so he's no other person but Noah Healy. So Noah, how you doing? How's it going over there?
It's going pretty good here. Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Noah is joining us today from the US. Can you just do us the pleasure of introducing yourself and just telling us where you're joining us from today?
Absolutely. So I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's a small town that's a couple hours south of Washington, D.C. We have a couple of presidents' houses here. So Monroe and Jefferson are both from Charlottesville originally. As for me, I'm interested in computational mathematics. I've been working in algorithm design for a couple of decades, and I'm pursuing a patent on a new design for organizing marketplaces. Markets were actually one of the first artificially intelligent algorithms that human beings ever discovered, and we've been degrading the operation of them over the last half century as new forms of artificial intelligence have been being developed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us once again. So, Noah is a market designer. He's also a data engineer, a data scientist, if I'm not mistaken, with decades of experience. So, he's going to be bringing all of that to the table today as we begin to talk about the artificial intelligence revolution that we are seeing in the world today. Everybody and their mother is talking about artificial intelligence. If they're not talking about ChatGPT, they're talking about some other artificial intelligence driven tool. And here we have Noah, who is not just a data scientist, but he has actually created a product. Now, generally, for those who are listening to this for the first time, Creativity Boost is all about helping people ignite their creativity, their innovation, and problem solving skills. And from time to time, I have the plan and I have the leading to bring in guests that will come in and talk about some topical issues where they have actually gone from idea to creation in their own journey, or just give a an expert view from their own field, what they think about creativity and its impact on whatever they have expertise on. So for Noah is someone who has created a product with some AI technologies, and he's also someone who has that hunger for creativity. He's someone who is very enthusiastic about the field of mathematics. So if you're listening to this and you are not that much of a tech savvy individual or you are not that much into mathematics, I still believe this conversation is something that will add value to you because myself and Noah will be unpacking in a way that a layman can understand. We'll be unpacking some basics that everyone should know and that everyone must know about the artificial intelligence revolution and its impact in human creativity. So, having laid that foundation, Noah, I'd like you to just kick us off by just telling us what is artificial intelligence, you know, in a way that a layman can understand. What is artificial intelligence and why should anyone care about it?
Yeah, well, it's becoming a very important topic because people are labeling many different kinds of things AI. Some of them are superficially quite similar, even for the experts. The essential idea behind this current phase of AI comes down to a technology that's colloquially known as neural nets. And this is actually a very old technology indeed. Uh, the first proposals for this design of program go back to, I'm pretty sure, the 50s. Uh, However, computers in those days really weren't powerful enough to make the techniques practical. There was a brief flurry in the 80s when it looked like they'd reached a useful plateau, and it turned out that they really hadn't. Uh, However, over the last decade in particular, not only have computers become enormously faster, but also techniques allowing these programs to operate on GPUs, the graphics units, which are far denser in terms of their information processing, along with some other techniques that actually allowed the neural nets to be utilized in ways that made them more effective to train, meant that some really stunning results started to come in quite quickly. Um, so lots of people just think that GPT, is synonymous with AI. That is one strand of what these neural nets are capable of. That is what is generally called generative AI, where it's sort of making something. Uh, Another kind of very important AI that's really come on again within the last decade is something called reinforcement learning, where you can effectively create one of these models in a scenario where it can simulate against itself in order to become better and better at doing some sort of task. And so any system that can be computer modeled or in other ways actually take advantage of modern information scale, uh, either reinforcement learning or these generative systems can potentially disrupt those tasks.
Amazing. So in 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 other words, artificial intelligence goes beyond just ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just like a strand of the artificial intelligence space, and can actually what benefit we can actually get from the AI revolution. So, having said that, what can you tell us about ChatGPT? Like, what is ChatGPT all about? Then, if ChatGPT is not all there is to artificial intelligence, what is ChatGPT, and why can ChatGPT do what it does?
Sure. So generative AI is basically just trying to come up with plausible responses. It's based on this general algorithm. There's a famous white paper titled "Attention is All You Need," and people that are interested can chew on that one. But the basic idea is that language has some kind of structure, and indeed, it obviously does. If I were to suddenly say peanut butter, well, that's not terribly unexpected because I set it up. But if I
Yeah,
were to
I
just
would wonder
interject
what's
it,
going on.
right, if I were to interject it in what were, if say your doctor was giving you a diagnosis over the phone for your child's fever and were to suddenly say peanut butter, you might be a little disturbed. So language has some sort of structure, and so by using this attention trick where effectively what happens is the the system figures out pairwise how all kinds of patterns of words actually appear in usual English language. It can take a sentence, and of course they've now moved into some other languages as well, but it can take a sentence in a language, look at what sort of patterns exist that in the responses to the kinds of patterns that are in that sentence, and basically pick some of them and provide them to you as responses. And as it happens, those responses are looking more and more like plausible human responses. Um, The trick with these types of things comes down to a few different pieces. Number one, how big a pattern the system can absorb. So ChatGPT 3 was capable of dealing with around 400 tokens. And tokens is sort of the internal word for words. Words contain things like a and the, which don't have a lot of information. Tokens are sort of information bearing units of the pattern. So in general, for English, there's about 4 tokens to every 5 words, because we'll have some ums and ahs and a's and these and other interjections. Uh, 400 is a decent sized chunk of text. 500 words isn't nothing, but it's clearly insufficient to produce, the next great American novel. I believe the current versions of GPT are up into the thousands, and other things are moving up. Gemini, Google's rather ill-fated recent unveil, was actually 1 million tokens. So it can in theory eat up like an entire library shelf as its inputs. Um, but Google's Gemini failures actually point up the second issue, which is what you train it with is also very important. And so Google's decision to embed in a very deep way into the training certain patterns about what it wants reality to look like, which obviously aren't what reality actually looks like, causes a very large disconnect. Whereas ChatGPT did a significantly better job than Google did with its much smaller patterns. Um, what this means is that uh, what you're effectively getting is sort of an averaging out of all the stuff that originally went in. So if you were to say take Shakespeare and Ian Fleming and all the other writers of the last 500 years, uh, what ChatGPT would effectively do is sort of average out what their sorts of responses are. And the way to really tell that this is pretty much what's going on is that you can actually call out very specific styles. This is very famous in the case of biblical language. Lots of people have sort of gotten their grocery lists done in the style of, say, the King James version of the Bible, or Shakespeare. But you can
Yeah.
literally do it with anything. You can ask it to give you directions to your neighbor's house the way that Dashiell Hammett would write it, and get all kinds of hard boiled, that the dame is out to get me types of stuff in there. And so effectively, what ChatGPT is doing is it's figured out what the patterns of styles are, and because our language contains a certain amount of information, those styles contain that amount of information. But ChatGPT isn't performing deep understanding. And so when people ask questions that are specialist or otherwise, or ask for sort of meaningfully coherent stories, that's where these systems start having some problems around the edges.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much for that. So, having said that, another question comes to mind, like, can artificial intelligence replace human creativity? Because, like, we see a lot of changes happening in the world of business today. We see lots of things being automated. We see jobs that you would otherwise have paid thousands of dollars to get done by people. You see them being done by AI. You see them being done by tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and other tools around, right? So, is it possible that we are coming to a point in human history that artificial intelligence will replace human creativity?
That's a very contextual question. So I have a few different examples. So number one, I think it was the Iowa State Fair accepted a a image generated picture for judging. They knew that it was an AI generated image uh, for judging, and it won the blue ribbon, I believe, last year. It's a fairly impressive picture. It's sort of redolent of the Pointillist piece about the day in the park, um, except that the setting has these sort of wormholes that look somewhat like the Doctor Strange wormholes in Avengers Endgame, where there's sort of holes in the sky that are off into these other fantasy worlds. So it's a pretty impressive thing. Now, on the one hand, you could say that this is a case of AI overtaking human creativity. On the other hand, the guy that admitted this and got the blue ribbon actually generated hundreds, if not thousands, of images, refining his request and then doubling down on those images on multiple iterations in order to get that one. So in this case, what's more going on is that the AI, again, has distilled certain crafts around visual image creation, and the creativity of the action, it belongs to the person. On the other hand, I'm watching an interesting series that I got put onto by a blog by a chess grandmaster. Uh, the Leela Open project, which I believe actually won the last chess championship, so it might be the enthroned strongest. There's a current one going on, so we'll see if it or Stockfish is the strongest chess engine, basically. But somebody created a new mode for it to operate in, called Win, Draw, Loss, Contempt, where it actually creates new kinds of sharp openings. And he's exploring this space and pointing out that whereas historically preparing new openings is a reasonably complex and time consuming task for grandmasters, where you actually have to have a new idea, work with engines to explore whether or not the idea has merit, learn enough about that exploration so that you can utilize it against actual opponents. Um, this particular version of Leela just generates these ideas. You can put a relatively standard opening on the board and give it a few moves and let it go until it changes its mind. So in this case, we have an AI that's actually exhibiting creativity in a specific domain where it's learned quite a lot about that domain. Uh, so while modern generative AI appears creative but is not currently performing in a creative fashion, some of these deep learning, reinforcement learning AIs are exhibiting creative but very domain specific behaviors today.
Okay, that brings me to another question, because for me, I came to a point in my study of the subject of creativity where I began to ask myself the question: what is the difference between creativity and innovation? And I came up with an answer, and I think that's something we can also discuss. And my answer is that creativity is creating something out of nothing, and innovation is creating something out of something. So, from what you've said so far, ChatGPT and AI in general, generating responses, generating results based on the data that have been fed into these models over the years, or based on how they've been trained with data. Would you say that these results that we see and these capabilities that we see being performed by AI are just innovative in themselves and not necessarily creative, since these are machines at the end of the day. These are machines that, they just garbage in, garbage out. The only thing is they do them in a very patterned way that is helpful and that is useful to humanity. So, what would be your response to that, school of thought or that angle to this discussion?
I think that's a pretty decent way to think about things right now. Um, one one kind of the application of this AI that is sort of faded a little bit out of well, public discourse, but was a really big deal when it was first dropped over a decade ago, is deepfake. This concept that you can take an image of one person and insert it into a video of somebody else. There was
Yeah.
a very famous video created of Barack Obama giving a speech that he hadn't given because an actor that frankly didn't look a lot like Barack Obama and didn't sound a lot like Barack Obama was filmed in front of a podium very much like a presidential podium giving a speech, and then a computer was able to adjust that performance so that it looked like it was Obama doing it. And also, I guess within the last couple of years, a young Mark Hamill was inserted to resurrect, 80s Luke Skywalker for one of the Disney shows. Um, that there's an interesting wrinkle with that one where the studio's original version doesn't look that great, and a fan actually who was experienced with deepfake actually improved the studio version and published, and I believe got a job and not a trip to copyright jail for it. So happy endings all around there. But that deepfake is sort of very specifically an innovation type of thing where you have an image of the way you want something to appear, and you have a performance that you want that image to be embedded in, and this technology can simply merge those two things together, but needs those two pieces to merge them, uh, and and to great extent, that's going to be our challenge. Is we very much conflate your definitions of innovation and creativity. Uh, and there's going to be a lot of things that are new looking because of these new capabilities. Not all of them are going to be particularly valuable. The ability to create images that look like the president is saying something are obviously extremely dangerous, which is why that particular thing was made in the first place. Uh, and so, what kinds of upgrades to our society do we need to to continue to operate in the face of this technology? That's a call for creativity, and that's something that very much is going to have to rest on people, because there's no evidence today that AIs are going to be able to, make any particular strides in that direction. Um, so yeah, I'd say from the way you're defining it, much more innovation than creativity. And if somebody wants to creatively figure out how we could not have leaders anymore because we can deep fake them now, uh, I'd invite you to share.
Yeah, nobody wants to live in that kind of world. Yeah, so something that interests me about your background is that you have this great, you know, great experience, great hunger, great enthusiasm in the subject of mathematics, right? And I believe you also feel that mathematics is a branch of learning that is also valuable to creativity. Personally, I think that creativity is applicable in any field, any field, whatever field you want to think about or talk about, creativity is applicable because problem solving is, involved in it, and creativity is in existence for solving problems, for problem solving. So, can you tell us how creativity can be found in mathematics, or how it can be made relevant in mathematics, or how mathematics can be made relevant in creativity. Either way is fine, man. I just want you to help us make that connection between mathematics and creativity.
Sure. Well, I share your fairly strict definitions of creativity, and uh, math is the area in which it is possible to sort of step onto ground that has never been seen before. Um,
Hmm.
Mathematics, particularly now with the introduction of general computation, all of imagination lies within the scope of mathematics because everything imaginable actually has a computer program that's related to that imaginable thing that describes what that imaginable thing is. And as it happens, every computer program has a mathematical proof that's associated with it, which means that every physical object, every system that exists is actually proving some mathematical fact about reason and imagination. And we don't know what all of those things are, but that's an inevitable fact. Uh, and so when you have this fertile ground that's identical to imagination at every point, it creates this space where entirely new things are, I wouldn't say easier to come by, but that's the entire purpose of being there, is to find things that are entirely new, and coming from nothing. In fact, speaking of coming from nothing, one of the major issues of the 20th century was discovering fundamental contradictions in the structure of very simple systems like arithmetic. And so new kinds of ways to structure arithmetic were worked out in order to deal with these contradictions. And one of them is something called Frankel's or Mello uh, uh, numbers, and the nature of that numbering system is that the core of it, starting with 0, is the empty set, which is quite literally nothing, and a simple function turns the empty set into a sequence of sets that takes over for the entirety of the integers. So every number has this complicated set of subsets which always devolve to different arrangements of nothing. Um, so, for example, 0 is the empty set, 1 is the set of the empty set, and 2 is the set of the empty set and the set of the empty set, and so on. So these ever more elaborate constructs of quite literally nothing form the basis of arithmetic today.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've actually given me a mathematical proof of what I've always believed to be, a definition of creativity. You've given me like a computational um, illustration of why I think creativity is basically creating something out of nothing. And of course, innovation is also a type of creativity. But if you really want to like distinctively define it, it's easy to just say creativity is creating something out of nothing, innovation is creating something out of something. Wow, that's amazing. So I have a question, and I'd like you to just speak to your invention that's currently in the process of getting patented. I'm aware that you've actually created something, right? And that's one thing that really endeared me to bringing you to this show, because I have a desire to really speak to people who have created something out of nothing, or out of an idea, or out of a talent they had, or out of a skill, or out of a need they saw in society. So, can you tell us about your creation or your product? And as you tell us that, I'd like you to also tell us what inspired you to go into making that creation that you have made?
Uh, sure. Well, the core idea for any marketplace is that there's buyers and sellers. There's people that have stuff that they need less than they need money, and there's people that have money that they need less than they need that stuff. And so the foundational problem of the marketplace is how do you arrange those agreements such that both sides will agree? Uh, and and this problem is hard enough to solve once, but you need to solve it over and over and over again, hopefully forever. It's a bad market if one day nobody wants to agree anymore, and we've seen that
Yeah.
happen numerous times over just the last few decades. Uh, so what my system does is it says, okay, agreements are information, and we know how to measure information. So what we'll do is we'll set up a series of agreements and let each one of them be evolved by user input, so that we can see what the over time structure of agreements looks like. And then, since what the ultimate test of an agreement is whether or not people actually agree, we'll take these agreements and present them to the people who are in a position to make or not take deals, and just say, are you in or are you out? The you've already done the negotiation in the first phase. Now we're seeing whether or not you actually like the outcome of the negotiation. So if the people agree, then they pay a fee for utilizing the system, and they get their agreement, and that fee goes to the people that contributed to the agreement. And if they don't agree, then there's not much of a fee being generated, and the people that made that agreement don't really get paid for doing something wrong. And people now have information to create better agreements. And so the entire system is about coming up with not the right price today, but the right price today and tomorrow and next week and next year, and just navigating the entire system of buyers and sellers towards whatever best economic outcome that they can all experience is. In terms of my inspiration, the primary inspiration was just to see if it was possible. I had this kind of vague intuition that a kind of math problem I was working on could be made a lot more complicated, but hypothetically much more useful, and and just wondering whether or not I could have this much more complicated thought was enough to get me, off the couch and thinking about it. But as I was doing this, um, I had to start engaging with how marketplaces worked. And this was, well post the global financial crisis. There's certain dissatisfaction with current market dynamics was in me. And as I learned more about how the markets functioned from an algorithmic point of view, in order to figure out how to create a parallel system with the same capacities, I became less and less enchanted with that market structure. And so finally, when I got to the point where I'd solved the problem, found that it was better, and started the process of bringing it into the world, um, at this point, I'm extremely disenchanted with the the current market systems. Not only do they not perform as well as this does algorithmically, but they don't perform as well as they used to perform before we had all these computers and stuff. They're much more expensive. They're much less stable, and and it's very obvious why. It's because computers are speeding them up beyond the rate that their algorithm works. They're a little bit like back in the 70s and 80s, video games would occasionally not use timers because the processors were so slow. They could just basically tell the processor to go as fast as possible, and the monsters still wouldn't, move all that quickly. And so what happened, as some of those popular games would then be run on machines, a decade or two later, somebody would get their brand new home computer in the 90s, like a 486, and put their old game on it, and everything would start moving in hyperspeed because the new processors were so much faster, and the game wouldn't be playable anymore. Basically, we did that to the entire global commerce system.
Whoa, that's really huge. So, what were the setbacks you experienced as you conceived the idea and began to work on it? Did you work on this system all by yourself? Did you need help from people? How long did it take you to get this idea out of your head and make it a reality?
It took about 6 months, and yeah, I'd say it was pretty much uh, just me. I had a few conversations with a few different, like, family members and friends about what I was working on, but nothing substantive. Uh, it was mostly just sort of a process of uh, wondering about various possibilities, doing some research. The main problem was discovering a structure of functions. So I was doing like historical research to discover what properties of functions were necessary, and then I had to do some creative work to try to find mathematical functions that had the properties that I needed. And then I had to do a little sort of craft work with those functions to see whether or not they were compatible with each other. And eventually, uh, after getting all those things together, I wrote a program that actually compiled and ran, and you could run load testing on and so on.
Amazing. I'm also aware that you have actually created what we could call like programming languages for big companies, right? So that's also another level of creativity. That's you being able to like look at a company, look at a system, look at a an ecosystem, and come up with a model or come up with an algorithm or come up with a solution. To put it simply, to come up with a solution that can serve their needs. So how do you go from idea to creation when you have a problem? How do you go from idea to solution? Like if you were to, give a 12-year-old a process to going from idea to solution in solving a problem in the marketplace, what would be like your template for that person?
Well, I go a lot off of intuition, and so for me, innovation's a lot easier than creativity, using your definitions, and so
Yeah.
gathering up a lot of patterns is a sort of very good first step. So
Hmm.
I've read vociferously across many mathematical disciplines, and what that allows me to do is very frequently recognize problems. Uh, Lots of people hate word problems when they're introduced in school, uh, but that's really the trick. If mathematics is simply a game of symbols on a
Hmm.
page, then it's meaningless and it's worthless. The
Wow.
value is that when you can recognize an actual situation that's in front of you that happens to be analogous, in many cases perfectly analogous, to one of those symbolic systems, that's when you can take a problem that is physical or social or otherwise, write it down in symbols on the page, and then start using those tools. Um,
Hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not the
Thank
innovator of
you.
this idea, but yeah, that's the approach.
Thank you for that answer because you said something that really struck me when you talked about patterns. Because I've come to discover that creativity actually requires the use of patterns, right? It requires either discovering patterns, it requires leveraging patterns or using patterns. It also requires breaking patterns, and then it requires creating patterns. And so, from my own understanding, I believe that to be an effective problem solver or a creative, one must be able to, successfully recognize patterns. It could be a behavioral pattern of a system, of a market, of a people, of a place that needs to be changed, that needs to be altered. But you first of all have to recognize something that you know is happening in a systemic way or in a repetitive way that should either be changed or should either be replicated or adapted, you know, from place to place or in a system. I can give an example, like the guy who invented the Uber app, for example. He came out and he wanted to book, a ride on a very busy day. I think it was Christmas or Christmas Eve, and he couldn't find a ride. And he recognized that that was a pattern that needed to be altered. That was a disturbing pattern, and he went ahead and started trying to figure out a way to break that pattern by creating something. And by creating something, a solution, that solution now has become a template, a pattern that other creators that use similar solutions are trying to copy, right? So that when you mention pattern, that just stuck out for me. That whole insight just popped up for me, and I'm looking forward to actually going into more details, maybe in some of my future episodes about design patterns, design thinking, and whatnot. So thank you so much for that, Mr. Noor. Yeah. So I have a question. What is the impact of AI on our world and how can we take advantage of it? What's the impact artificial intelligence is having in our world today, and how can someone who is not tech savvy, how can someone who is not a computer engineer, who is not a data scientist, who is not an artificial intelligence specialist, how can the lay person take advantage of it?
That's quite a question. The impacts are happening very, very quickly these days. So many people are unaware that human beings aren't particularly good at playing games anymore. Uh, Games like chess, which are very well known, Go, which is well known in Eastern countries, and is basically the oldest strategic game that human beings have. Games like poker, which are extremely well known. Humans do not play any of these games at the highest level anymore. Computers are better than us at all of those things. Um, Many people dismiss those kinds of things as sort of trivial or recreational and therefore not particularly important. But the fact that deep questions that human beings have cared about in some cases for thousands of years, uh, and that we pay some people millions of dollars to get good at, uh, is something that human beings can't actually be good at anymore. Has a lot of implications for other fields that we pay people millions of dollars to be good at, like law, medicine, business, and so on. Um, the changes are quite dramatic when AI can be applied usefully. So, for example, within the last year, the number of known stable chemical crystals has increased by a factor of five.
Wow.
So things like steel work because of the stable crystalline structure of carbon and iron. Uh, and and over the course of human experimentation and history, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 known possible stable crystalline structures were discovered. An AI system was given about a day on like the Google cluster, and it came up with another 220 or so thousand of these structures that work. Another project that was open sourced just within the last month um, does weather prediction. Now, right now, weather prediction is a global activity. You need literally information from everywhere on Earth. It takes a supercomputer array that is funded by multiple countries a day to do 10-day forecasts. Uh, and those 10-day forecasts, they're not great, but they're better than guessing. Um, the new system is small enough to operate on a single server node. It's open source. Anybody who wants to download it and play around can make these predictions. It takes a minute, and its predictions are slightly better than the previous predictions. So that's a more than 1,500-fold improvement in weather. In terms of what people can do around their day to day, that's a very hard question. The the amount of creativity and innovation that's available to people in their day to day lives is almost unimaginable. As I mentioned earlier, um, with a certain amount of persistence, it's now reasonable for a person to generate a piece of art that will win a statewide blue ribbon, which means
Hmm.
that you could, by spending, maybe a week or three playing around on your computer, create a image for a mural or a picture in your bathroom or something like that that would be completely original and effectively museum quality. How would that impact your life? Maybe you're not aesthetic. Maybe you wouldn't care at all. Maybe it would make you happy to wake up every morning. You know, these kinds of possibilities are now available, and finding ways to turn those possibilities into better modes of life is the challenge for people that are in a position of leading their communities or leading their own lives. Uh, these things are extremely accessible and have incredible potential. So that's what's happening, really. I mean, I can't give specific and detailed directions for everybody, but
Yeah,
as
that's
a
fair. Like,
as a simple assumption, every aspect of your life is going to change, and whether it changes for the better or for the worse is a public conversation we need to have,
hmm.
because
And
both are
that
on the
brings me to
table.
my next
Yeah,
question. Yeah, that brings me to my next question because from what you're saying, it's obvious that literally everything is being impacted and is going to be impacted. Like, for example, I'm an author and I've written about 17 books, and I see people who come out from time to time and say they can write books with AI, and that is actually possible, right? But I feel like,
sort of.
sorry,
Sort of.
yeah, that's possible, and I feel that that is also dangerous because there's this that real human, you know, originality, that real human creativity cannot be replicated by AI. In my own estimation, right? AI cannot, have a story to share without a human touch. In fact, AI needs a human to program it to function well, right? So, in the light of that, it's kind of like, a coin that has two sides. AI has the potential of, you know, changing the ecosystem of the corporate world, but at the same time, it's going to deny humanity of originality that used to exist when there was that pure human creativity at work. And that brings me to my next question. Is artificial intelligence going to make humans less creative? Because when you begin to think of how with AI you can even write a book, of course it may not give you the same taste, it may not give you the same quality, it may not give you the same feel as it would have given you if a human wrote it. You're telling me now that AI generated pictures won a statewide competition, right? So does that mean that humans are going to become less creative? Because one thing I know from my study of the subject of creativity is that the less you use your creativity, the less it grows. The more you use your creativity, the more it grows. And if we are going to start depending on AI to do some basic things that we would otherwise do or depend on our creativity for, doesn't mean that we're going to see less and less creativity quotient, if I can use that word, in humanity.
So I'm very open to bad outcomes being possible. Um, I see this as a fork in the road, if you will. Uh, I've said this on other podcasts. I've said it many times. Computers are a bigger deal than steam engines, and with steam engines, the Romans actually had steam engines. They didn't figure out how to use them, and they collapsed, and humanity suffered a dark age. Then millennia later, uh, the English worked out steam engines, came up with a kind of society that actually didn't want to torture peasants, and introduced a level of wealth that we enjoy today as a human species. Computers do for muscle power what do for sort of neurons what steam engines did for muscle fiber. So are human beings weaker today than they were 400 years ago? Probably, sort of. Um, but on the other hand, we're a lot wealthier. We're a lot healthier. There's a lot of benefits. Figuring out how to make it beneficial to have these things in our lives is the challenge.
Mm,
And I could easily see, I could much more easily see a scenario where increasing human creativity was the right answer rather than decreasing it, because it's fairly easy to imagine that in a world where we decide to decrease human creativity, that we get much more like the Roman solution, where things kind of decay and fall apart, and we stop thinking, and stuff fall. Eventually the computers don't turn on anymore because the electricity doesn't come out of the wall, and then everyone has to kind of figure out how to start going from scratch again. So so I think the challenge is that we're going to need to come up with a better way for us to live.
mm,
I don't think that would include us being less creative. It might, but that's what's in front of us. We find this wealthier, happier, you know, better life, or we watch our current life get torn apart because either people decide to stop thinking for ourselves, or we can't tell the difference between when the president says something and when the kid next door sends us a text message from him, that kind of stuff. So, like, which way are we going to go? I vote for better, and I've got my market system as part of a contribution to that, and I
amazing.
I want to engage with people like you, so we can work on the problem.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so happy, we're having this conversation, and I look forward to having like similar conversation because just sharing with you and conversing with you, I've been able to pick up a thing or two about the possibilities of the AI revolution that we are in today, and what role creativity should be playing in that realm. And just to chime in, as a follow up to what you just said, which makes sense. I think we actually need creativity to be able to use AI creatively in this revolution or in this era, right? Instead of thinking of AI a as a danger to creativity, I think that we even need creativity more than ever before now, because we need to figure out creative ways that we can use the capabilities that artificial intelligence has brought to our doorsteps. We need to figure out more creative ways that we can use it to transform our world for the better, right? So it will only become a danger when we sit back and allow AI to do to us what it wants to do to us, of which is not possible, or we allow a few individuals to dictate to the world how AI should be used or how AI should behave. I feel like every individual should be thinking in the line of being a problem solver with the use of artificial intelligence capabilities that we have now. So I think that is a very big takeaway that we can, agree on as a way forward in this revolution that we are, you know, gradually entering into, the AI revolution, as I would call it.
Yeah, well, I have a podcast with the former CTO of Reddit, and that's the name. Our podcast is called The Fourth Age, The AI Revolution. So we're
Wow.
on board with you on that one.
Oh, amazing. And I didn't even know about that when I said what I said. So that really makes sense. And the onus is on us who have this orientation to actually educate people and educate people in our circles, educate the world about these responsibilities that is falling on our shoulders. And if you're listening to this podcast, I want to encourage you that you don't have to be tech savvy to be informed, to be aware of what's going on in the AI world. You don't have to be tech savvy to think of creative ways you can leverage AI to solve a problem in your world, because that's where creativity is being demanded. So AI cannot demonstrate creativity at the level that humans can demonstrate it. Even if the AI we see around today seems to be doing stuff that humans have otherwise done in history, but that's a call of duty calling every one of us to come up hither, to move to a higher plane in our display of our creativity and leave mundane tasks and repetitive tasks that AIs can replicate, and leave those tasks for the computers to tinker with, while we do the more higher level task of deploying our creativity in ways that will make a better use of AI and make the world a better place. Thank you so much, Noah, for joining me on today's episode of Creativity Boost. Do you have any final words that you'd like to just leave out there? And also tell us how we can connect with you for those who are listening and who would like to maybe take their connection with you to another level, or find you on social media. Just give us some ways that we can connect with you.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can hear me talking about uh, those sorts of topics on my podcast, The Fourth Age. That's on all the platforms we could find. Uh, you can find me on LinkedIn, Noah Healy. You can reach out directly, noahphealy at yahoo.com. You can find my website, CoorDisc, COORDISC. And actually, the patent has hit quite the insane snag. You can read about it on change.org, where I have a petition under all caps CDM underscore all lowercase patent, uh, where I'm looking for support in trying to get my new marketplace out into the world.
Amazing. So for those of you listening, I'm going to drop all these links that he has, shared with us in the show notes or in the description below. So you can do well to check those out so that you can have the correct links. And like Noah said, he has a patent that's pending approval. And do you want to just say something briefly about that as we bring?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, I've got the petition out. The patent office accepted, then ignored its own acceptance, then came up with the concept that they couldn't grant the patent because they were claiming that 1 and 2 were the same number. Then they reaccepted when they admitted that 1 and 2 were different numbers. And then they were forced to withdraw that acceptance for reasons that they can't disclose. And they have now scheduled the appeal for July of 2025.
Wow.
So something's going on. They're not allowed to talk to me about it, and they're willing to lie to Congress about it. So I'm trying to bring as many eyes and light to this process as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Noah Healy is a market designer, a game theorist working on developing better economic systems. And it was such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much, Noah. Yeah.
Thanks for having me here.